Why Materialism is Complete Nonsense. Bernardo Kastrup on Alex O'Connor's big channel. I made sure I hit the like button. Of course, I'm subscribed. Be sure to subscribe to us. I want to hear what they say. You recommended. I got an email from one of you who watches this channel. You're a fan of what we do here at MythVision Reacts. And I want to give my 2 cents, my insights as I hear it, because I've actually interviewed Bernardo Kastrup myself before in the past. And he has a form of idealism that made me still scratch my head, trying to wrap my head around, what ultimately is he trying to say? So let's see if we can gather the insights and see where he's going with this, and if he's on the right track, what your opinion is. I want to hear in the comment section below, and I'll give you mine along the way.
What do you think this microphone in front of me is made out of?
I think it's made out of mental states, mind states. And the matter that we attribute to it is an extrinsic appearance and an image of mental states.
So, okay, right there fundamentally, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? This is seemingly already heading down the path of the discussion that I had with him before. And he fundamentally thinks things are all mental states. Like, ultimately, they're mental states. Whatever that really even means, because he doesn't want to call it consciousness. Not all things are conscious. So he calls them mental states. But then he separates himself from people who... Let's hear what he has to say here, because I'm telling you, this is a really interesting but also difficult for me to wrap my head around, because at some point you drill down and you finally hit something and you go, yeah, but what about this?
Okay, quite a concise answer to what can be in this context quite a complicated question, and perhaps one that's already raised a few eyebrows. I think that if you ask the average person on the street, what is a microphone made out of? They might tell you it's made out of metal. You ask them what metal's made out of, and you sort of keep going down until you get to it's made out of atoms, and you ask what's an atom made out of? Well, it's made out of electrons. And what's an electron made out of? And they kind of begin to struggle a little bit. And this is an idea that I've been interested in recently, and there's this growing popularity in the suggestion that once we get down to the foundation of reality, we're talking about something like consciousness or mind. I've been talking about that in the context of panpsychism. You have a few choice words for panpsychism, which hopefully we can get into and we can critique it. But I think they kind of come from the same kind of starting point, which is that this assumption of materialism, that everything is kind of made up of stuff like, inert atoms that bump into each other, is somehow mistaken. Bearing in mind that probably the majority of people who are listening are materialists, I would assume. How do you begin getting into a discussion about what the world is really made of and trying to argue that materialism is false?
Well, we need to get out some of the false implications that people usually derive if I say that the microphone is made of mental state. I'm not denying metal. I'm not denying what appears to perception and measurement as matter, as atoms. These things are empirically verified. We can measure this stuff. There is something out there that goes by the name of atom and metal and aluminium and so forth. None of that is denied. I'm not denying that there is an external world beyond my mind. What I'm saying is that these external world beyond my mind, just like my mind, is also made of mental states. And just as my mental states appear to you as matter, my brain, the atoms of my body, the very measurable, very physical stuff, so the mental states that constitute the external world appear to me as matter.
So it seems a bit of a leap to me, personally. First of all, one of the things I would like to start with is consciousness, right? We're still in the process of trying to wrap our minds around this, but will we get to a point where we have understood that consciousness developed from non-organic, non-conscious, non-organic materials into organic, biological material that gave rise to consciousness? Or do you have to suppose, you know what, really, the egg came prior to the chicken that gave birth to the egg again, and that egg is consciousness, which is prior to this fundamental material, right, that we find that the universe just so happens to strangely have that would allow for life to organically evolve and to become what it is from, we call it abiogenesis. So Here's my thing. You've got, if we could show that material, if we were able to show that material like Mars, let's say, or we could show that life could organically evolve from non-organic materials into organic materials, Kastrup could still back it up and go, still behind all of that, there's still mental states. That's how non-organic material is capable of producing organic material. The problem is how can you back up that all behind that is mental states? At least with you and me, I could suppose there's a mental state there. You can tell me now, and I can go, okay, you are conscious, you have mental states. But I just don't know how we can look at material matter and then suppose behind that without observing and testing and actually being able to know that behind that in the metaphysical, there is a mental state for that material and that they're interconnected.
Part of which is this microphone made of mental states in front of you. So we have to avoid this culture-induced wrong implications and false dichotomy and start by saying what we are not denying, so people don't run away with an assumption that is false, and then explain what we do mean.
So the real world, so to speak, is out there. You know, some people think that if you think that everything's made up of mind, that kind of the microphone is like just an idea in my head, or that I've somehow created it by my imagination, a bit like a dream that I'm having right now. But that's not what you're getting at, right?
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, I asked the same kind of question. Is the tree still there if I'm not in the woods to observe it? Yes, the tree's still there, he'll say. But there are idealists who say without a mind observer, there is no tree. You need an observer for the tree to exist.
What you are describing is either solipsism or a version of subjective idealism, a la Berkeley, who said, to be is to be perceived, so things exist only insofar as they are perceived. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that, yes, there is a world out there independent of my mind, a world that does what it does and would still do it even if I were not here to perceive it, even if there were nobody here to perceive it. But that world, too, is just like me, is made of mental states. And when there is a perceiver, those mental states appear to the perceiver according to the qualities that we describe as physicality.
How do we know that the physical material world fundamentally is a mental state beneath the material, actual, physical, observable, testable, repeatable? Like, how do you know that behind that is a mental state? How can you be certain of that when you can't measure that? You can't test that. You're just using your own intuition because you've had experiences, you as a conscious person. But even in the material world, we look at other things that seem to appear to be living and give them conscious agency and would have no problem saying they have mental states. But when we start talking about the rock, or we start talking about dirt, or we start talking about air, oxygen, like whatever it might be, all of that is mental states as well. And how would you, I mean, I just don't know, maybe the term mental state, he's distinguishing it from consciousness clearly, but like how do you wrap your mind around proving that, or giving solid or giving a strong case as to why there's mental states behind it, when all we can do is test what can be observed physically and the measurements we have? I don't know why we'd go beyond that without having data, if that makes sense.
Like extension, texture, temperature, weight, and so forth.
So what's wrong with saying that, okay, I agree that there's a world outside of my own mental, perceptions, but that world is just a physical world, and all there is physicality, things like mass, charge, extension, texture, those kinds of things. If you just add those up together, you get a complete description of everything in the world, with the exception maybe of conscious states like in human beings. But this microphone is just made out of physical material. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, why is that? Why do I have a mental state and inside, internally, I'm conscious, right? I am an observer of it within. And he gets into some of this stuff all the time about external observations on material doesn't tell you what the thing is. But we'll probably end up hearing him go into some of this. But why is my microphone have a mental state? Or it fundamentally in all things are mental states. How do we know that?
Well, it leads to all kinds of insoluble problems and significant implications that we don't need to deal with if this story is not true. Let me give you an example. If you say that, yes, all this physical stuff that we measure is the fundamental layer of reality, and there is nothing else that it is beyond how it appears to me, basically we are saying then that the noumena are the phenomena. The thing in itself is its appearance to observation. If we say that, we are saying that the world is made of non-conscious stuff, fundamentally non-conscious, because consciousness is precisely the idea that there is something it is like to be the world beyond my own perception of it. There is another ontological ground beyond how things appear to me. There is this thing as what something is in and for itself. If we eliminate that, then we have to reduce consciousness to fundamentally unconscious stuff, which nobody has managed to do. And
yeah, so eventually, if we are able, I guess the question would become if we can show that from non-living, non-organic material consciousness develops, maybe he would still just take the position that the non-material stuff is still conscious in some way, which gave rise to how we have consciousness ourselves. I don't know. Look, it's this interesting thing. He's not approaching it like a typical, theist would. But if we can show that, and we have some room to learn and constantly grow, that would be fascinating. Number two is, I still think even the materialist would grant that as primates with eyes that have evolved in the planet and the conditions we are, there's clearly going to be blind spots, and we can't perceive things perfectly. We're not going to understand things with our limitations as human beings, as biological animals on this planet. We're not going to be able to really grasp everything around us and measure these things. We didn't evolve for that. So we're doing our best to tap into it. So there's always going to be something more that we aren't able to fully grasp, or maybe we're not completely aware of the things that we're actually testing, like this material world. What is all of this for real? And he wants to go to mind state or something like this. I don't know if that needs to be the answer. I just think maybe materialists can admit we don't necessarily have all things figured out, and we're doing the best with our observation to see and fundamentally understand the world without needing to go to a mind state. Because I'd be like, how do you prove the mind state? How do you give that evidence? That would be what I'd ask for.
I would claim it has been proven to be even an incoherent thing to try. It's wrong in principle. It's like saying, how do you reduce the number 5 to a marital status? Something illogical like this. It leads to also unfortunate psychological implications, the most important of which is that if consciousness is just some kind of epiphenomenon, if mentation is an epiphenomenon of fundamentally non-mental stuff that exists only so far as the stuff I can measure about it, then we are oddities in the universe. We don't really belong here. We are a peculiar accident that's coming to an end. Our consciousness, if it is an epiphenomenon of particular configurations of matter, when those configurations cease to exist, like when my body decomposes and loses its structural and dynamic integrity, then my consciousness ends, and everything that it is like to be me comes to an end. And therefore, I'm already dead. I just don't know it yet. Everything is ultimately for nothing. All of these implications arise from this seemingly small step of saying, well, if we are all acknowledging that there is an external world, it is not a big deal to say, then it is just what it seems to be. In other words, it's just what I can measure. It's just what I perceive. And there is no inner world to it. There is no inner being to it.
Yeah, but again, so I agree. It's interesting. If we did arise, I don't think anyone has a problem with saying that, it's a rare circumstance that, consciousness arose, right? Or at least it's a strange thing that we are auditors of this universe, like he described it. Of course, he uses much larger vocabulary to try and describe the very simple thing I think he's trying to get at. But then he brings this point up about the internal observer. And again, I'm like, how do you know that the material world, all of it, not just conscious beings, but all of it is mental state, all of it. And how do you know it has that mental state, or it has being? How do we know that it has being is the question I have.
Seems like a small step, but it is a gigantic, not only logically and empirically unjustified, but a gigantic step as far as human psychology and culture are concerned. And
hold on, it's a gigantic you pretty much just said it seems nonsensical. And the question is like, where do we begin? Do we begin, we have minds, we have to philosophize, we have to like mental masturbate in order to go, well, okay, we have minds, therefore there must be a mind out there, intuition. And therefore we have our limitations as humans and observers, and we're trying to test and all this and that. Therefore we must make that extra leap beyond the material observation of the world into some kind of conscious mental state, something like that. Is it really like, can you prove that? Can you show me? Where's that actual evidence that suggests that's the case? Or do we start with what we can test and know and work backwards? And I think that's what we should be doing, even though we're going to probably end up in a infinite regress of issues, or we're going to have an ultimate we don't know. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Mental states, or did actual physical material give rise to conscious beings such as ourselves? And it seems like he's saying, no, you have to have the conscious mental states in order for the rise of these things. Now, if science could show that consciousness came derived purely from materialism or within the material bubble, or that life organically came from non-organic, non-living substances, he'd still probably have to hold on to the idea of mental states. But I'm wrapping my head around this thinking to myself, yeah, you pretty much have either material gave rise to life and consciousness, or you're saying that there must be some kind of consciousness that allowed for the material world in order to give rise to these things. I don't want to strawman him, but it sounds like he makes it sound like it's insane or impossible. There's no way that we're ever going to find that out, and we shouldn't even try, right? Which is usually a red flag for me. I think we should try. When you act like it's nonsensical, what if we can find out or observe through science the non-organic giving rise to organic matter and stuff like that? He could still then just move his stuff behind that and give mental states with an unfalsifiable claim that we can never prove or disprove, you know?
it's unfortunate.
Can you talk to me about the difference between qualities and quantities and why that's relevant here and what it says about the materialist hypothesis?
Quantities are descriptions. If I take this bottle of water and I put a tape measure next to it and I say, well, this is 45 centimeters long, that's a description of my experience of seeing the water bottle. If you tell me it's 45 centimeters, I'll have an idea of what to expect if I were to perceive it. If you tell me it's 45 kilometers, then I will have a very different expectation of what I would experience when I perceived it. So quantities, the entire stuff that constitutes the substance of science, are descriptions. Qualities are the thing described. Qualities are the stuff that appears on the screen of perception, the stuff we are acquainted with before we take a tape measure to it. I know that there are qualities associated with this water bottle. I feel its weight. I feel its texture. I see the quality of its colors, the silver, the white, the black, the patterns of pigment on it. These are qualities. Qualities are experiential states, what it feels like to perceive, to feel, to do, and so forth. Quantities are descriptions of what appears on the screen of perception, which of course is eminently qualitative. Everything on the screen of perception is qualitative. Colors, textures, sounds, melodies, aromas, flavors, and so forth. All of it is qualitative. Quantities are how we describe the stuff that appears on the screen of perception. Now, what is cruel about our cultural situation is that even though we all start from qualities, 300,000 years ago when Homo sapiens took the first step, well, maybe a little longer than that, all we had were qualities. And then at some point, couple of hundred years ago, we discovered it was very useful to describe these qualities through quantities. And now we think all there is are quantities. and qualities are somehow epiphenomenal, a sort of a magic trick conjured up by the meat inside your skull. It's a peculiar cultural evolution, and if you really contemplate it along its historical axis, it is incredibly nonsensical. Future generations will have a good laugh at us, at our expense.
So if I understand him correctly, correct me if I'm wrong here, anyone who might actually be a Kastrup fan and has studied his work, it sounds to me that he is saying people felt, intuited through experience, touch, smell, senses, etc., as observers, and identified things in the world where we now today are just descriptive. So quality and quantities. We're looking at them as quantities instead of quality. And the ancients used to look at things more along those lines versus being just descriptive about them in a scientific measuring kind of way. That, oh, well, their importance is based on the measurements, observable, testable, blah, blah, blah. It's almost like love, right? I'm making an analogy here, but I've talked about this recently. Love. If you boil down love to, well, the chemicals in your brain cause you to get a euphoria in the frontal lobe cortex, midbrain, whatever, cerebral cortex, you name all these stuff, right? And you're explaining what's happening, like in the material world, what's happening. But the experience is profound, artistic. There's something great about that love. He's saying that ancients didn't boil it down to the chemical compounds in the brain and the mechanics, so to speak, but much more just based on, I feel love. And love is real. And that experience itself is a mental state. It's having its experience that is profound and deep. And I get it. Maybe a lot of people are letting go of more of that quality and going for the quantity that he's describing. I hate using these terms. I really wish it was much more dumbed down to make it much more simplified for people like me, but also other people. But at the end of the day, it makes me think that it's almost robotic, and we're boiling down love to be the chemicals in your brain. And Alex, I know, who studied a lot, probably feels that's what he's trying to imply here, is that, well, it all boils down to just the material world doing these things, and that's why these reactions are taking place. But where's that getting us? Where is that going? And I do see the problem with thinking of the world through that lens as primates on a planet who live through experiences and stuff. We're living a life that feels like a dream. To me, it does. So it's like a story, okay? Like I'm living a story through this observer in my mind, my brain. And anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Did I correctly understand what he's trying to imply?
I have no doubt. You expound upon this criticism in, I mean, two of your books, Why Materialism is Baloney and also Analytic Idealism in a Nutshell. Analytic Idealism is the name of your worldview. And you press this point, I think, quite powerfully, that once explained seems actually a little bit obvious. That, yeah, we sort of describe the world in terms of mathematical formulations. It's weight, its extension, its length, that kind of stuff. But the thing in itself has to precede the evaluation and description of and prediction about the behaviors of the thing. The thing itself has to exist in the first place. And you've compared this before to going like hiking in the mountains and using a map and being like, you know, you experience the mountains and you've tried to describe very accurately the topography of the mountain range on this piece of paper, which you call a map. And then somehow people have begun to think that instead of the map being, you know, emergent of the mountain, you had the mountain and then you made the map out of it, that somehow the mountain sort of mysteriously comes out of the map, and that the map is the only thing we have, and that the mountain is just emergent from this descriptive thing that we came up with like 10 years ago. And not only that, you're doing it while you're stood on top of a mountain. You know?
Exactly.
So that's the hard part, though, and I'm sympathetic to this. I really am sympathetic to what Bernardo is trying to suggest here, what Alex is getting at. The only issue I have is how can you prove that it isn't material? That how can we as observers who have limits on what we're capable of doing make that leap that mental states must be behind the material or that object, right? Its quantities and its qualities, because both of them work together. And Bernardo Kastrup will say, like, there's a sense in which they both work together and operate and function with one another. Why can't the material have given rise to the mental state, rather than you must have mental states that gave rise to material? I mean, which came first? Or are they simultaneous at the same time, which that means the universe is eternal, and that material is eternal along with, in some way, shape, or form, however you want to picture that. Scientists may be able to wrap their minds around, along with mental states, but like they have to coexist, or one gives rise to the other first. Anyway, I'm thinking of the mountain. Like the mountain existed first, then the map comes up, then like, or better yet, let's say one has to argue that it's the map that exists first, that then there's the mountain. I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. Help me out in the comment section.
And we are stood in the face of perception. We experience things as qualia, as the philosophers call it. We experience colors and smells and tastes, and it's a complete mystery why it is that if I look at a blue light, it produces the feeling of seeing blue instead of the feeling of tasting a hamburger or something. And all we do is we just know that, well, when that happens, this experience happens. We know that they correlate. But the question we need to answer is like, why? Why do they come together? And the materialist just sort of doesn't sort of move the dial there at all. Like, does materialism have anything going for it?
Well, I'd be curious to ask someone who is much more akin to an expert on the brain, maybe an expert scientist who understands why the brain recognizes certain things, the observations, the tools within our mind that allow us to observe those things. I'd be curious to know what a materialist would say and how they would, analyze that particular question. Why don't we taste hamburger whenever we see blue? There are weird phenomena where people smells when they hear certain noises. Things like that do happen. In fact, Darren Brown, the mentalist, did this as a kind of trick on his audience, making them smell mint when he played the audio at a certain hertz on the speakers. And literally people were raising their hands, believing that they had smelt mint. Anyway, this video is what? I'm 11 minutes, 52 seconds into this, and it's 2 hours long. You're going to have to go check out this actual video. If you liked this reaction, let me know. I will react to the remainder of this. It's super in the weeds, and I don't want to bore you guys and get into like really, really weeds unless you like it, and I'll know with the comments. Subscribe, share, like the video. I want to see that you're enjoying it, so I'm not wasting my time for another, hour and 40 minutes diving into the deep end on this stuff and reacting to it. I'm open. Look, I'm a student. I really do not want to pretend I know, but which came first? Did material give rise to the conscious states that we have, or was it some mental state, conscious state, gave rise to material stuff, and then, of course, you get out of that conscious states as well, or mental states as well, from the material? Or do they coexist? What is Bernardo Kastrup's view? I have not read his books. Curious to know what your thoughts are. Like this, share it, and until next time, see you then.